not talk.
Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. I'm Caesar Griner, your host, and our guest today is a longtime Wadsworth resident, Mary Long Griner. Mary, you know, when we say a longtime resident, you're not all of that old, but your ancestors have been here forever and ever and ever. So why don't we start with Mary Long Griner right off the bat and tell us about your birth, and then we'll go backwards from there and even frontwards from there. So how about starting off with when you were born, where were you born, or do you mind telling us how old you are? Not at all, because we all know, right? In Wadsworth, everybody knows everybody else's age. So how about starting with that?
Well, I was born in Akron, Ohio. My dad was working as a carpenter building houses. And I was born on the street where Summit Lake goes up the hill.
Right.
And the street's still there.
The street is still there. That's about the only thing around there that's still there. But your father was born here in Wadsworth, and your grandfather and your great-grandfather.
Right.
And you just happened to be born
well,
away
that
from
was
Wadsworth.
my father's first job doing carpenter work.
And your father was John
M. Long.
Who had
carpet and linoleum
here in Wadsworth for years and years and years. That's right.
Right.
And then when did you come back to Wadsworth to actually live?
Oh, probably our first home was on Humboldt.
On Humboldt.
And we lived next to Barb.
Weldy?
No. The Phillips lived on one side and Fry's lived on the corner, and the old pumpkin house was there across the street.
Which Fry?
Joanne Fry.
Joanne Fry, and her father, mother Mayfrey Fry.
Right.
And William Fry, father.
And we lived next door to Chamberlain's. That's who I was trying to...
Oh, Barbara Chamberlain. Okay.
Yeah, that's who I was trying to think of.
Okay, Barbara Chamberlain, right.
Right.
What is there right now where Barbara Chamberlain used to live?
I have no idea. No. The houses, I think,
the house is still there. And is the house that you were living in still there?
Right.
Right. The pumpkin was the house which was across Boyer Street.
Boyer Street, right.
Right at the bottom of Durling Park. And the reason they called the pumpkin, tell us why they called the pumpkin.
Because it was all little apartments, I think.
Right, but what color was it?
Probably, I don't remember.
Well, it was kind of a yellow, and it looked kind of squatty, so they called it the pumpkin, right?
Right.
Joe Bender owned it.
Right.
That's right, exactly. So you lived there, and brothers and sisters. Tell us about brothers and sisters born.
Well, I didn't have a brother till I was 14 years old.
And then that was John?
My brother, John Jr. was born.
Right.
And he still farms on the original farm.
And tell us where the original farm is.
It's on the corner of Reimer Road and Route 57.
Route 57, right there is a huge farm there. And your dad farmed there, and your
my grandfather
farmed, and your great-grandfather farmed there. And has been there for probably how many years?
Oh, I imagine from, I do have a big book at home, probably in the 1850s maybe.
I believe that's correct. It started in the 1850s.
Yeah.
They cleared the area, and then they made a farm out of it, and your brother still does farm that.
Right.
I would say probably that farm has been in your family for a good 150 years, don't you think?
My Grandpa Long had a milk route when they had horses and wagons, and he would bring milk into Wadsworth, into the town.
At one time, Wadsworth had 11 dairies right within the city of Wadsworth, or very close to the city of Wadsworth, and the reason for that is that they didn't have any refrigeration. So what they had to do then was to deliver the milk almost as quickly as it was milked.
Right.
And that's why we had so many dairies. We had some of the south end, some of the north end, east end, west end, and then we had some dairies on the outskirts. As a matter of fact, we had one that was almost all the way to Norton, but it was called the Willowbrook Dairy, the Cyberling Dairy. Then we had, what was your grandfather's, the name of your grandfather's milk route? Do you remember that?
No.
Many of them didn't even have names.
I would say Longs.
Probably Longs.
Yeah.
Longs Dairy. We have a person in Wadsworth, Mary, who has bottles from all of these, and that person is, oh mercy, Johnny Hayne.
Oh,
Who used
okay,
to work,
I know
Johnny
John.
Hayne, who used to work
Right.
for Willowbrook Dairy and Cyberlink Dairy and all of that. Your girlhood days, we want to find out what you were like when you were a little girl and what you did, where you went to school and all of those kinds of things. So tell us about that.
Well, I always came into Wadsworth to school. I was in kindergarten when we lived on Humboldt Avenue, and I went to Lincoln School. And I do have some old pictures from Lincoln
You do
School,
have
but
some
I
old pic-
didn't bring
You
them.
did bring them. You did bring some wonderful pictures today, and we're going to be seeing those a little bit later on. Tell us then, how long did you live on Humboldt, and where did you go from Humboldt?
From Humboldt, we went to Grandview Avenue, and we lived there a couple of years.
And who were some of your neighbors there at Grandview at the time?
Ted Scott and Sally Scott. I
That was-
played with a lot of the Witchies
The
lived
Witchies,
next door.
That was Bernard Witchy and
Bernard
Tom Witchy
and
and Anna Mae
Tom.
Witchy.
Right.
Agnes Witchy.
Agnes.
Agnes.
Right.
Anna Mae was her cousin. Yeah.
And
Frank Witchy family and Estelle Witchy.
Dancy's, a lot of colored people
Right.
lived down through there then. Not a
Chuck-
lot, but some.
Well, down through Mill Street there.
I used to bring Leona Dancy home and give her a jelly sandwich
Oh, really?
every night from school.
That was nice. That was nice.
We used to,
Chuck Dancy was a tremendous football player.
right, and the Cartwrights.
The Cartwrights,
that
Merle
we all
Cartwright.
played and all sled rided on the hill.
On the hill.
Right.
That would be Merle Cartwright, and he was a
Right.
he was a foreman at the match company, I believe, in either Book Match or Wee Wee's. I've forgotten which, but I know that he was down there.
Right.
And he also had a saw sharpening operation when he retired in the area behind his house. Tell us some of the other neighbors that you had there.
Oh, I'd have to go down through Grandview, Fixler's,
Which Fixler?
Buttars,
Which-
Joanne Fixler,
Joanne Fixler, okay.
Dick Buttars, Reps lived across
Reps
the street.
and-
Mr. Hartman lived there, and he always had his birds, and we'd always go over and watch his birds a lot. He had canaries that he
Now,
raised.
which Hartman would that be?
I don't know.
I'm trying to think which Hartman lived on Grandview, but
Opplingers lived up on the corner.
which one? Which Opplinger, Russ?
The mailman.
The mailman? Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But their kids didn't come down that way too much, but we'd play once in a
I'll
while.
play once in a while, okay.
Yeah.
Then from Grandview, where did you go?
From Grandview, we built a new house out here on Broad Street, and it's still there. About 2 years ago, they sided it with a tan siding,
And what was the number on Broad Street?
700.
700 Broad Street.
And the gas station was on the corner, Carly's.
Carly's gas station was on the corner.
And Jerkovich lived next door to
And
us.
Jurkovich did what? Let's see.
Had the grocery in
Right.
the south end.
South End, right.
And a Mrs. Granger and her son lived on the other side.
Would her son was Ralph Granger?
Yeah, he did. Well, one of them did surveying
That
a
was
lot.
Ralph.
Ralph.
He became, I think he might have been the county engineer at one time too. Mary
And
Maxine.
Hanges lived next to them,
Hanches, right.
and Rogers lived in the house that Bob, he's in our historical society, Schaefer.
Bob Schaefer. Right.
They owned it, and these people rented it. And I
rented it.
can remember going over there. There were 3 boys and 2 girls, and we'd play in the barn a lot out back.
What Rogers family was that, and what did they do?
Harry Rogers, and he lives up in Copley now, and Jack Rogers, who worked for the city of Copley, Margaret, and they called her Peggy, I think, her nickname.
Peg.
Ruthie, And there was a little one, Loretta.
Loretta Rogers.
And during this time, they had cows in the barn and kind of farmed the land there that was owned.
That was across the street from you, though, wasn't
Yes.
it? Yes, across the street from you, in the house that has the stair steps roof, right?
Right.
And then the barn that you're talking about is an old barn right now. But
Yeah, I think did Bob sell it for part of the school
I'm
here?
not positive. Well, yeah.
I don't know what actually, you
Right.
know, the land on
Do you
it.
remember anything else about some of your friends that you grew up with and when you were still living here on Broad Street?
Paul and Betty Long
and
lived
Betty
on
Long.
Silver Creek, and they used to be part of the group that would
Right.
play together a lot.
Paul married Katie Bird,
Bird.
and Betty married Rex Rohrbaugh.
Right.
And Rex is gone. Katie is still living, and Paul had a brother. Well, he had several brothers, but the one
Melvin.
but he's dead now. And,
Right.
and he married Liston, not Katie.
Bird.
No.
No.
Katie Bird was Paul's wife, Evelyn Liston.
Evelyn Liston. Right.
Mel married Evelyn Liston. So
They were a little older than I was.
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
What we try to do is to establish relationships here. So now, let's go with the Long families for a while, and then go with your mother's family, which of course is also one of the old families here in Wadsworth. Who was
Right.
your mother?
Alice Long.
But Alice who?
Stormer.
Stormer. And tell
She and Olive Dick are cousins, and the Dicks bought the farm up the road on Bear Swamp, where
Bear
I
Swamp.
now
And
live.
tell us about the Dick family. Who are they, and how are they related, and what is the significance here?
My mother and Mr. Stormer, Olive's father, were brother and sister. And my mother was the youngest of 17 children.
17 children.
And I have a scrapbook, you know, with some of the pictures. I never knew all of them.
Well, you were probably therefore related to everybody in Wadsworth, Mary, aren't you? Pretty well so.
Could be, I guess.
And your father had a fairly large family too, but not all that large.
No, not
But one
that
of his
large.
sisters had a huge family.
Hilda had the big family.
How many did Hilda have? Hilda
I
Gardner.
think 11 or 12. One died.
Yes. So they had a big family. So
Right.
Among all of your cousins, I suspect that you couldn't get them into the biggest hall in Wadsworth, all the cousins. That you
Another cousin that I have is Warren Skidmore from Akron.
Who is
He
he?
worked all his life at the Akron Public Library. He's still living.
Is he? Mhm.
Yes.
And he's related to on your mother's side.
My mother's sister was his mother.
His mother, I see.
And Warren has done a lot of geology work, you know, genealogy.
Genealogy, right.
Right. And I have things that he sent me off and on.
That's so valuable. What a pity it is that the old folks didn't write these things down, because you know, they were brand new at that time, but now they are ancient for us, and
Right.
we are having to dig to get that information.
My mother had a brother that was a minister in Ravenna, Ohio.
What was his name?
I think he was James Stormer.
James Stormer.
And every year we'd go to a reunion at his house. And his house stood until a few years ago. They put a new highway and they tore it down.
One of the reasons that we always try to give a geographical location of something is that so many of the things that we grew up with are no longer here, and 50
Right.
years from now it may not be here at all. So that's why we typically try to say, tell us geographically where that is. Mary, you have so many things that we want to talk about here, so I'm going to fast forward to your high school days, and you had a significant high school life, and tell us a little bit about that, and then I'm going to show some pictures about your high school life.
Well, the main thing, I was in the band and a majorette from the 8th grade on.
A majorette, as a matter of fact, you were head
Right.
majorette at one time, were you
Right.
not? Right.
O.J. Work was the principal, and we always enjoyed him because he used to take us in his car when we'd go twirl at basketball games like Kent or different places
And
we'd
you married,
go.
and you mentioned going to Kent. There was a girl in your twirling, whose name was
Pat Kent.
Patty Kent, right?
Right, and she's back in Wadsworth
Yes, I
now.
interviewed her not too long ago.
Did you?
Pat was one. Who were the other twirlers? Barb Weldy, Pat Kent, you. Who else?
Joanne Snyder,
Joanne Snyder.
and she's dead now.
She's gone, right, yeah.
Gone. Nancy Flack.
Nancy Flack lives out in state. I can't think of the name of the state, and I know exactly where it is. It's Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
Arkansas. I couldn't think of it. Yeah.
Well, I think Al Duttlow's retired from Las Vegas. He played in a band.
Right.
And I think he lives in Arkansas.
Does he live in Arkansas now?
He married a Wadsworth girl.
Yeah, Norma Ewing.
Yeah.
Right. What? Anybody else you can think of who were majorettes at the time? In the 8th grade.
Not too much.
Who was the band director in the 8th grade?
Bennett?
E.K. Bennett.
E.K. Bennett.
Who died in 1939. Then who followed him?
Thomas, maybe.
Harlan Thomas.
Harlan Thomas.
And then Harlan Thomas was here for a little while, tall, skinny fellow.
Right.
And then following him was a Farmer. Is that correct?
Right.
That's correct. And then following Farmer was?
I don't know. I can't
You were probably
remember.
graduated by that time. Yeah. Well, you graduated what year?
1947.
We have some pictures here of your majorette days. We're going to show those in a couple seconds. Let me find them quickly. Majorette days. Well, I thought I had them here. But,
Yeah, I think you told him to save them.
Oh, I don't have that one right now, but we'll show something else that you did a little bit later on. After you graduated from high school, which was in 1947, the world was pretty well at peace because the war was over, and things were kind of a little bit better than they were before. But where did you go to work?
I went right after high school to the Ohio Match Company.
And what did you do there?
I did the payroll.
You did payroll. As a matter of fact, we have a picture of payroll right now. Describe that machine and that payroll picture that you have there.
That was one of the first National Cash Register payroll machines. And it had buttons on it. You would put in things like a typewriter, and it would do its thing and shoot the card out.
As a matter of fact, we have a better picture of it right here. This picture right here shows it even more specifically.
That was one of the first addressographs made. That had metal plates, and it would print names on checks.
Who's the girl standing there to the left of the?
That's Wanda Lee.
Wanda Lee.
She lived on South Lyman Street.
South Lyman. What about these other two girls? Who were they?
I'm the one on the front there, and the one behind me is Gloria Kreider. She used to be Gloria Freed.
Gloria Freed, okay. I know Gloria Freed, I didn't recognize
her dad worked at the match company.
That's right, exactly.
My husband's father worked there.
That's right, the Griner.
For years, right.
Now, when did you get married then?
1953, I think.
53, and you married?
Bob Griner.
Bob Griner, who was a high school sweetheart.
Right.
Right.
I had gone with Bob from the 8th grade.
From the 8th grade on. So you got married then in 1953.
He enlisted in this service with 3 other boys from town. Carl Simcox, Chuck Pettit, and George Nelson.
Right.
And George still lives here.
George still lives here.
Right.
Where's Carl Simcox? I thought he lived
here.
He
lives in Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh, I see.
I see him every once in a while. Chuck Pettit.
Is he still living?
Yes, he lives in Oregon.
In Oregon.
And the past years, our last high school reunion at Brookside, Chuck came.
He came.
And he told me he had a ride that he made into Kansas or someplace in the middle of the country. And then he rented a car from there to make the rest of the trip.
That's wonderful. He had a sister, Rosie Pettit. She was a very strong girl, as I remember. Very
Yes.
strong. And
She married Harley Holben and
Right.
lived up on High Street for a while.
no, Broad Street, wasn't it?
Well, they lived
Harley
on.
Holben was on the corner of Broad and Baird, I believe, wasn't he?
Well, they might have lived on High Street at
I mean,
a
when he
time
was in high
too.
school. When he was in
Yeah.
high school, I think so. Then those fellows, except George, I don't. George didn't play football, did he?
Not much, I
No,
don't
I don't think so. But the other three boys played
Played
football.
football.
That's right. Did you work anywhere else after the match?
No.
No.
Well, after I married Bob, he served 3 years most of it in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really hard on him because when he would come home on leave or anything, I mean, he was always nervous about it in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And after we were married, he'd sit up in bed at night and yell, "Here they come."
Oh, bless his
The
heart.
Chinese then had invaded Korea, and he was right up on the line fighting the
Oh boy,
Chinese.
that was horrible. There are so many of those stories about the Korean
Korean War.
Korean War.
There was a Lily boy from town that
Jack
was
Lilly.
killed, and Bob wasn't too far from where the train
Oh,
came
boy.
down through, and this Lily boy had lived down off Water Street someplace.
And when he was going to school, he lived on Clark's Corners, Jack Lilly.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, Bob went over to verify that it was him.
Oh boy, that was horrible. I remember when Jack died. It was just horrible, absolutely horrible. Knowing what you know now about the Korean War and the fact that Bob himself had these flashbacks, you can probably appreciate then that so many of these guys are having flashbacks,
Right.
not only from the Korean War, but from the Vietnam War.
Well, and another thing, the Army would not discharge him. He had to serve an extra year, and that's when we got married, and we moved to Louisville, Kentucky, and he would go to Fort Knox. He was an instructor in the armored school down
is that
there.
right? Mhm.
Right.
What did he do when he came back from to civilian life then, Mary? Bob,
He went to college.
right?
Right.
And so many of the-
Heidelberg.
So many of the people went to college after they served.
Well, they got to go on the GI
That's
Bill,
right.
and that's why they went.
That's right, exactly. That's right, exactly.
Bob said always that his dad worked too hard, and he would never take money from him to go to school or
That
college.
was right, absolutely. Bob had three brothers, or a brother and a sister.
Right.
A brother was
Ira.
and sister was
Geraldine.
Geraldine, red hair.
Right. She
Right.
still lives in Barberton.
Still lives in Barberton.
Yeah.
Now, how about, well, let's take you all the way through your kids and grandchildren, and then we're going to go back to the historical part of the Long family.
Okay.
Your children and then your grandchildren. Don't forget any. Remember, you get in trouble if you forget your grandchildren.
I have 2 daughters, and the oldest one is still teaching kindergarten in Wadsworth. She teaches at Lincoln School
And her
this
name
year.
is?
Ramona Mitchell.
Ramona Mitchell.
And the other one is Cheryl Hughes. She went to Eastern Kentucky. They both went to Eastern Kentucky. And Bob always insisted that's where Glenna Lobenthal sent
Right.
her kids. And,
Eastern Kentucky is a university.
Right. And I have a daughter that has taught, Cheryl, who has taught her all her life so far in Falmouth, Kentucky.
I have a little story about Eastern Kentucky. We were on our way back from somewhere. One of my children were small, and the car. I stopped the car to get gasoline. I couldn't start it again, so we had to wait until it cooled off. So we actually walked down to the University of Eastern Kentucky, which was maybe a mile or so. Well, on the way back to get the car again, by this time it would have been cooled off, my then 6-year-old daughter, had to go to the bathroom. And as you well know, if you have small children, I mean, that's an emergency. So we were walking up, and there was a lady sitting on the front porch, and Linda, my wife, said to the lady, said, "I'm so terribly, terribly sorry to bother you, but my daughter has to go to the bathroom. Could you?" "Yeah, absolutely," she said. "Come on in." We went in there, and it happened to be the wife of the president of Eastern Kentucky University. And he was extremely, they were extremely gracious. And then he drove us back to where the car was, and we came back home. Now, grandchildren, Mary.
Okay, my middle grandson is Cheryl's son who teaches in Kentucky now. He's a senior at Eastern Kentucky this year. Be his last year there. And then my oldest grandson, he wanted to go away from home. He graduated from Norwayne High School. He played football. And he now lives in Phoenix, Arizona. And he graduated from Arizona State. And he's still out there. I was out there a few weeks ago.
To see him.
Beautiful city. They've rebuilt it. Highways, you wouldn't believe the new things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Arizona is really coming forward with a lot of innovations. So does that take care of all of your grandchildren? You didn't forget any?
No, I have the youngest one.
Okay, let's go with that one.
Bart. He finished 2 years at, what's Akron Hughes College in Orville? Wayne College.
Wayne General Technical.
So now he's getting ready to go. He wants to go to North Carolina State for what he's pursuing in college.
Right. We just came from there. My niece's wedding was down there, so we just came from there.
Oh, good.
Let's go to the Long family now, and go with John Long, and go with what he did when he came to Wadsworth and he started his linoleum store or his carpet store. When did he start that? Where was it? Who worked for him, and so forth?
How do I want to? He was young when he started the first store. He was in with Springer Furniture.
Right, Springer Furniture. They had the furniture store on the north
next to Don Merriman's.
Right, but the north side of College Street, next door to the church. There was a three-story building, and it used to be Finney Frock Furniture, and then Helmick. Then Finney Frock and Helmick Furniture, and then that was changed, and it was to
Card Dibble. Took it one time. I can remember the Dibbles in there when I was little.
But they didn't call it the Dibble Furniture.
No.
I think they finally called it the, no, they just kept Finney Frock and Helmick, I think.
Finney Frock and Helmick, I think.
And then Springer Furniture, and then Wadsworth Furniture after that, wasn't it? No, I don't think it became, no, it didn't. Wadsworth Furniture was elsewhere. But you had the Springers, they had 2 children, a boy and a girl.
Right.
And he worked for them, and the Otts also worked for them.
Right.
And both of them branched out and had their own companies.
Businesses. Right.
As a matter of fact, didn't some of the Otts work for your dad?
Yes, Eddie Ott at one time.
Eddie Ott worked for your dad, as a matter of fact, in the store.
Carpet and linoleum.
Where was the store that your dad had?
He bought the building next to the bank there on the corner.
On the corner. Well, the first, where the Citizens Bank is, which is now the First Merit Bank, there's a store just north or west of that, which used to be the Kroger Company. Then he purchased that. Is that correct?
I don't remember.
Yeah. He purchased that, and he was in there for several years. Then he moved where? North of town?
Yes, and he had to hire an attorney from Medina because city would not let him build that building up there. So he hired Mr. Batchelder from Medina.
The older Mr. Batchelder.
The older Mr. Batchelder, and through that, he got to build the building up there.
And tell us where that is geographically.
Oh, it's north of where the men have their meetings.
The Masonic.
Masonic
North
Temple.
of Masonic, but listen.
On the corner of the street that goes down there.
Right.
And there was a gas station on the other corner.
That is correct, right. Tell us, from Route 76, about a quarter of a mile south on
Right.
the west side of the road.
Right.
In case those buildings aren't there 50 years from now, we'll know approximately
And
where
it's
it is.
where the doctor had a foot doctor across
Right.
the street.
The,
I can't think of his name.
Dr. Staten,
Staten.
right, across the street.
Right.
Now there's a chiropractic place there. No, I'm
Right.
sorry, not Dr. Staten. It was a chiropractor across the street, Dr.
Right.
Staten. Dr. Caplow was on the corner. It was the foot doctor, and he was on the corner of Boyer and High, I think.
Right, where the house is
Right.
with the stones on it.
Off the right with the stones on it, exactly. Now,
My dad had to fight city council. That's why he had to bring Mr. Batchelder into it. And he won.
He won.
Got to build the
describe your
building.
dad.
Oh, he was average height, but he was big, husky.
Big husky man
Yeah,
with a big husky voice and
Right.
a cigar in his mouth most of the time.
no, he never
No.
smoked too much.
Didn't he? I thought he had a cigar in his mouth, but maybe not.
Maybe he had it and chewed it.
He chewed it. He just
and
chewed
didn't
it.
smoke
He didn't smoke it. He just chewed it. Who were
Right.
some of the people who worked for your dad at the time? Do you remember?
There was a Grace Maurer from Doylestown. He had opened a store in Doylestown for a few years, and she came up here to work for a while. Rose Gordon
Rose
worked
Gordon.
in there.
And we interviewed her sons the other day.
Iona Yoder
Iona Yoder, right.
worked in there.
Describe Iona Yoder and tell us a little bit about Iona Yoder and where she lived.
She was just a little short girl, and they lived up on Yoder Road, and
Did she have brothers and sisters, do you remember?
yeah,
Do you know the name?
Mrs. Farnsworth was her sister, one of them.
One of them.
Yeah,
What about her brother?
Bud Yoder,
Bud
they
Yoder.
always called him.
Bud.
And I can remember when I was little, maybe before I even started school, all the Thrashers would go up there and eat dinner at their house. I can remember the big meals
Oh,
and
yeah.
layouts they used to cook
Oh, those
up.
threshing meals were something scrumptious, let
Right.
me tell you. You couldn't find a better restaurant in the town than
Nope.
a farmer lady's threshing meal.
All the wives would come and they'd all cook this
That'll help
big
up
dinner
that-
up at
beautiful job. They
Yoder's.
surely did a nice job of that too as well.
And Mary Evan Buffington, I'm in the River Styx Garden Club, and she still comes, and she's such a beautiful lady.
Yes.
And she still lives up there on the
And
corner.
the Buffingtons were related to the sheriff of Medina County at one time.
Right,
And they were, they lived in Blake, as I remember.
Right.
I remember. Now you have a bunch of aunts, A-U-N-T-S. Name a couple of them and name some of the great aunts who were very prominent here in Wadsworth and Clark's Corners and River Styx and
my Aunt Corrie Long was always very popular. She started the Cox Corner Women's Club.
the Clark's Corners. I have a picture of her somewhere, don't I?
I don't know whether I brought one of her or not.
I think we did.
That would be Walter's mother. She was a sprightly little gal.
I thought I had a picture, but I guess I don't. I thought I had a picture of Corey, but she actually had the she started the Clark's Corners Women's Club. Do you know any other members of that club?
Persis Kearns. Her mother lived on the farm on Blake Road till just recently.
Persis Kearns, right?
Right. And her mother was and Aunt Corrie were both members of that club.
Now, how is Aunt Corrie related to you?
She was Walter Long's mother.
And Walter Long was who to you?
He would be my cousin.
Your cousin. So
Right.
your Aunt
Aunt
Corrie,
Corrie was related to Irene Moeller.
to Irene Moeller.
She was a Moeller.
And Irene Moeller is still living in town.
Right.
And she's about 90, 3 or 4 years old?
Right.
Something like that. And I want to get her in the program. I'd love to get her on the
Oh,
program.
you need to get her on the program.
Well, it's easier said than done.
She don't want to come?
Well, you know, everyone that I work with obviously is somewhat older, except you, of course. But as a result of that, it's difficult to get them going. Many times we have to cancel because the night before they just become so nervous, and there's really nothing to it. Now, you've been on the program for just a few minutes, then do you even realize that you're on television?
No.
Not at all, not at all. Tell us a little bit more about the genealogy of the Long family and then also of your mother's family going back to 1852.
Oh, I mean, there were 17 children, and I have pictures of my grandpa and grandma.
And I think
and their house where they lived. I can remember going there in the summertime to visit them.
This is your grandfather here, isn't it?
No, that's Grandfather Long.
Oh, your
that
grandfather
lived
Long.
on
Okay.
Reimer.
And what about, do we have any pictures of are these grandparents there?
No, that's Mollers.
Oh, the
and
Mollers, okay.
Blanche Stevenson and her husband.
Okay, and what about here?
That's the original barn at the corner of Reimer and 57.
And this is where your great-grandfather started. Now, we're going to show a
Right.
picture of that barn. And what are those big haystacks in front? How
Well,
did they
that's
get
how
there?
they used to stack them, I guess.
Well, when they threshed, they had the straw would go out into the haystacks.
Right.
And they had two of them here, which means that they threshed a lot of wheat or a lot of oats because usually only one of those haystacks would be out there. Then they would use that
Right.
hay all year long for fodder.
Another interesting thing is my dad went into shorthorn cattle.
Shorthorn cattle.
Right.
And tell
They
us about
started bringing them in from Canada because he went to Canada and bought some a couple of times.
and how many did he have, and where did he keep them?
In the barn out
In the barn
there,
out there.
milking cows.
And how many?
And Art Spice, who grew and had the farm on Bear Swamp, after his wife died and he sold his farm, he lived with us for a while as a hired man.
Art Spice did? Oh, for heaven's sake! I
He
didn't
drove
realize that.
school bus.
Yes, I know who he was, but I
Is
didn't
he
realize.
still living? I don't
I
know.
don't know if he is or not. This is a picture of another group of animals that you had there.
That's my grandfather Long and Hilda Gardner.
Hilda Gardner. Let's have a picture of Hilda Gardner as a little girl. She had, 11, 12 children?
12, one
12
died.
children. One died, and then that's your grandfather, Long. And so this would be your
Hilda's my aunt.
your father's sister.
Right.
And they had sheep then, obviously, too.
Right.
So they had a lot of farm animals out there. We want to show a picture also of Wadsworth Centralized School graduation class of 1892. And tell us what the significance of this picture, Mary.
My great aunt, Blanche Stevenson, who lived on High Street, she graduated in that class, and she's in the top corner behind beside the ladder.
The top corner beside the ladder. Okay, and a very attractive girl, she was.
She always had a piano and an organ in her house.
She did.
She was very much a piano player.
She's musically talented.
Right.
Now, how is she related to Stevenson's court?
She married a Stevenson.
She married a Stevenson, right?
Right.
So, and it was Stevenson's
She used
court.
to be Blanche Long.
Blanche Long married Stevenson, so Stevenson's
Right.
court.
And they built 3 or 4 houses on Stevenson Drive, and the houses are still there. In fact, my mother moved in one when
At one time.
Yeah, when my dad died, she
And
moved
the
into
Stovers used to
town.
live down there, didn't they?
Yeah.
Vernon Stover and his sister. lived.
Right.
I think the significance also, this nice little picture of, I don't know what, I would imagine it's probably a 1925 or so Buick or one of the old cars. I don't know what kind that is, but tell us about that picture, Mary.
That's my father and his brother. We always called him Robbie Long, but it was Robert Long. And I don't know who the other gentleman is, but they bought that old car to travel to see the country, and they drove that car to California and back.
Wow, 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 wow. I bet that was a story there.
And I think that's kind of before any of them were married. You know, they
I would
were
imagine
just
so.
young.
Their wives would let them go for a month or so.
Right.
Which one is your dad?
He's the first one.
The first one.
To the front of the
one
car.
in the car. Now, Mary, you also have some relationship to Mills Street.
Right.
Tell us how that comes into play.
My grandma Long was a Mills, and her father, they lived in the corner house that's still there, and her father had a buggy and carriage shop.
Right.
And when I worked at the Match, first started, she must have still been living. And she told me she always, when she was little and grew up, she always played with Ruth Liebert.
With Ruth Liebert.
Who had worked at the Match.
We have, talking about the Match, we have some pictures here of the Match bowling team.
That was our first bowling team at the Colony.
We want to show that to the people. I bet there are a lot of them. How about naming some of those people? Starting from, if we keep that picture up and name them from left to right, as many as you can.
Oh, I can't too many of them. Maybe their first name. This is Marge.
We're starting at the top left corner now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, stop. Let's go.
They have a picture of this.
They're looking at the picture right now.
Okay. Angie Tackus. They're all Wadsworth people, but I can't remember all of them.
How about naming as many as you can?
This is Lena Recupero,
Right.
Violet Baldick. I'm in the center of the picture. This is a Tryon girl. This is Gail Hanna, Gloria Kreider. I think this gal was a Welty gal. This one's Marge.
Are you in the front row now?
Yeah, I can't remember some of them.
But I'm sure that there are people in town who will see this
They
picture.
all worked at the Match Company.
They all worked at the Match Company, that's right. Now, tell us a little bit more about the relationships here with Mill Street. They named Mill Street
after my grandma's
your grandfather's father, that's right.
Right.
Now, that Mill's grandson, right, that Mill's grandson had relatives who lived in Wadsworth, and there are a couple boys, Lewis Mills,
right,
and Carl Mills.
I knew Carl Mills.
And Eunice Mills.
Didn't know them.
Yeah, Eunice Mills married Willard Hollinger, lived in Corpus Christi, Texas. Had one daughter, Kay Branch, who lives in California. And that ends that family because I think that, well, I shouldn't say that ends that family, but Eunice is gone and Willard is gone. Carl is gone, is he not? And Lewis is gone, is that right?
Right, they're gone.
Carl was a painter, was he not?
Right.
And Lewis was a truck driver for Halls.
Right.
Right. Now, the significance here is that Mills Street did not have the mill on it. The mill that they're talking about is in the south end, and there's a mill road down at the south end.
You think that's the mill then?
That was the old mill, right, yes.
Oh, okay.
Now, beyond that, there is a Mills Road east of town, but that was named after Elton Mills, who lived on the house on the corner.
Okay, I've heard of that name
Right.
before.
There are 3 mills, either streets or roads or whatever, in Wadsworth, and all 3 were named after something different. The Mills was after the Mills Street, which is right off
Main
Street in Wadsworth, was named after your great-grandfather, and Mills Road down at the south end by the railroad track was because there was a mill there, and Mills out west of town, or east of town, on the corner of Broad and Mills Road was named after Elton Mills. I wanted to get that in there so that, you know.
I've heard of the names, but I don't remember some
I
of
remember Elton Mills. Now, the Elton Mills property is at the terminus of the Klondike mine, which started at Silver Creek, I mean the actual creek, and went all the way up through there. So now we're going to have to talk about some of the other things in your life as well. You have had a very eventful life in a lot of the things that you have done, but of the most significant would be the, shall we say, the last 25 or 30 years. What have you done in the past 25 or 30 years that I think that people would need to know about and like to know about?
Golly, I don't know what you really want me to say.
Well, you have been extremely helpful and just the cornerstone of the Wadsworth Area Historical Society, because you're one of the oldest families in Wadsworth, and on both sides of the fence, both mother, grandmother, and your father's mother was.
She moved to town and lived on North Party Street.
What was her name?
Frances.
Frances. Now, she has relatives in town yet, does she not?
Oh, I'm sure she does, down the line someplace, in the Mills.
In the Mills?
Yeah.
The Mills, okay. It becomes somewhat confusing because there are a lot of
well, Hilda's family too. My Aunt Hilda, the Gardeners. There was 10 children there.
10 children there.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of those people around. So you have to be related to absolutely everybody in town, obviously.
Eventually back.
Tell us what you can about the grandparents. Let's take the Long family, the grandparents Long.
My dad's mother and father.
Right.
Oh, I can remember when I was little, my grandpa used to sit me up on the horses they used to plow with. And to this day, I'm scared to death of horses.
Is that right?
Yes.
Because they're so big, probably.
And he used to always put me up on them. And I can remember Perry Winkleman
was a blacksmith.
Lived on High Street. They used to go to his house and play euchre on Saturday nights a lot.
And you would go with them?
Yes, and Perry had a full wall of fish, tropical fish aquariums, and I used to go and sit the whole evening watching those fish.
Describe Perry Winkleman. He was probably the last blacksmith in Wadsworth.
Yeah.
Describe him. Where was his blacksmith shop?
It was right behind his house on High Street, on the corner where they've a brick building there where you get videos. That's where his house stood, right where that store was, and he had a buggy shop or something down behind it.
Right.
He and his wife never had any children.
No, they didn't.
No.
He was a blacksmith all of his life, as a matter of fact. Did he not have a blacksmith shop also behind Brenneman's up in that area too, where the parking lot is?
I don't remember.
I think he did. Yeah. Tell us, describe Perry Winkleman to us.
Well, he didn't have much hair. He was always bald that I can remember him. And he used to go fishing with a lot of the men in town. And my Aunt Blanche used to always mention a rhymer.
Which rhymer?
Bill's dad's father.
Bill's grandfather.
Great-grandfather, I think.
Bill's great-grandfather?
Yeah, because I can remember Bill being in school.
Okay, great-grandfather. I thought maybe it was his grandfather, but you're probably right.
I think it's great. And he's in some of the pictures I have, but I have not been able to point him out.
Which one he is, I see.
Yeah.
And the Mrs. Winkleman, a little bit about her.
Clara.
Clara. Tell us a little bit about her.
I do have a picture of her with Perry, her husband.
Do you have that with you today?
No.
Oh, you don't have it with you today. It's
No.
too bad, because we'd like to see that.
I didn't pick it out and bring it.
We need to have a picture of them somewhere along the line, because I think that they were the last, he was the last blacksmith in Wadsworth. Now, going on your mother's side and that line all the way back, take as far back as you can with that.
Well, I can remember when I was little going to Pennsylvania, and we would always go and pick blueberries.
Blueberries in
And
Pennsylvania.
you weren't allowed to bring them out of the state, but we always put them in the bottom of the clothes baskets and
And you
put
took
clothes on top
and you
of
brought them
them
home. Why would you go to Pennsylvania? What was the
to
secret?
visit my grandpa and grandma. And I have a lot of pictures of them, but I didn't think Wadsworth people would, know them or be
That's
interested.
true, but how did your father meet your mother?
She came to Akron to live with her sister when they were young.
And then your father
And
met
my
her.
father was a carpenter for Milton Phelps. And he went into Akron and did carpenter work
and that's
a
where he met
lot.
your mother, and he brought her here.
Right.
Now, then we don't have, I want to establish the fact that your mother's family,
There's
your mother's
17 children in her family.
but they are not from Wadsworth.
No.
No, they are not from Wadsworth. So we are not going to be able to identify those people in Wadsworth.
No.
So I want to make sure that
Her
we have.
brother Dick Stormer laid linoleum for my dad all his life.
Now the Stormers were old.
My
time.
Aunt Martha still lives over
Right.
on Route 57.
The Stormers have been in Wadsworth for a good 70 years, 80,
Right.
or maybe even more than that.
More than that, I think.
Probably more than that.
Because
But
Dick Stormer worked for my dad
at the
for
time,
years
right.
with George Harder.
With George Harder.
Right.
And George Harder. Describe George Harder and tell us who he was and the significance he has in Wadsworth.
Well, he never talked very much. He was a very shy person. And I really have seen him more since his wife died. I run into him once in a while, Drug Mart or, places. He's still living and doing good.
But he's up in years, is he not?
Yes.
How old would you say that George is?
Oh, he's probably 80 or more.
Oh, way beyond 80.
Way
I think.
beyond 80.
I think it's way beyond 80. Of course, you never, it may not be that way, but I think it is.
His daughter lived in Columbus, and then I think he has grandchildren, maybe lives in New York someplace, New York City, not state.
We want to continue with this, but I want to pick up some things that we forgot to pick up in your high school days. You should have gone to centralized, but you did
Right.
not go to centralized because your father brought you into town, and you were the.
Well, they wouldn't let me ride on the school bus because I didn't go to centralized.
That's right. Mm-hmm. You had the.
And it was the 8th grade, and I was already twirling baton.
twirling baton.
Jack Redinger taught us at
Jack
first.
Redinger.
Used to
Describe
li-
Jack Redinger. He married Martha Hinkle.
He used to live on Hartman
Hartman
Road.
The first
And that-
house on the left-hand
Years
side.
back, that was Gypsy Lane.
Gypsy Lane, that's right. And Jack Redinger was a very intelligent person. And he had a
Right.
brother. He had a brother also,
Older brother.
older brother.
Right.
But Jack Redinger married Martha Hinkle, and Martha Hinkle died very young, unfortunately. And she still has 2 sisters in Wadsworth, Joanne Sussman and Nancy Shaga. Right?
Okay.
Those 2 are her sisters. But Jack Redinger was the
Head drum major
drum
at the
major.
band.
That's right, exactly.
He was really good.
Tell us a little bit more about some of the other friends that you had in high school, and tell us where they are, and describe some of them, so we get some more people from your age group.
Well, you said you had Pat Kent in.
Yeah, I had Pat Kent in, but she was younger than you.
1 year.
1 year.
We used to always go to the twirling contests. And she was tall and skinny, and I was more shorter, and she'd always get a 1 and 2 or 3 pluses, and I'd get a 1 and 1 plus, and I always figured it was because she was tall and
thin.
skinny.
Well, you were certainly a gorgeous girl at that time, too, as well. But who are some of the other people that you remember in high school who may not have been twirlers?
Oh, we had a big class,
And
over
tell
100.
us some of your friends, your closest friends. Who would they have been in high school?
Beatty Burbeck.
Beatrice Burbeck, who lost her brother.
And her house, this
In the
is
war.
interesting, her house on Leatherman Road
Right.
was part of the Longhouse. And they moved that house on tree logs up to where it stands
To where it stands
today.
right now. Her mother was Velma Burbeck,
Right,
and she was a school teacher.
Right.
A very strict school teacher.
Right.
Very, very strict school teacher.
right.
And whom else did you have as friends?
Oh, well, I lived in the country for so long that Barb Weldy,
Barb
you know,
Weldy.
the girls that were majorettes.
Barb Weldy was a majorette.
Yeah,
And she married Bill Cahoon.
right. People that I really know now, like Sally James,
Sally Mager.
Mager.
She was Miss Wadsworth, or Miss Ohio at one time, was she
Right.
not? And her husband died not too terribly long ago, as I remember.
Yeah, living in the country, I didn't have that much of it. I used to go home and play with Paula Young a lot. And Erlene Daly. There was maybe in 6th grade, 5th
But
grade.
Paula Young did not live in the country, though.
No, but I'd stay in town. My dad wouldn't close the store till 5:30.
Now tell us who Paula Young was and where she lived.
She was Wayne Young's daughter and
She
lived
lived
on the corner of East
Street.
and
Broad.
right.
And
I
Broad.
lived on East Street while they built our new house.
I see. And Paula,
That's where I first saw Bob, my husband, played with Carl Simcox and Chuck Pettit, all boys from the South End, and they all played football. But when I lived on East Street, we had a garage and kind of an addition on the back of it, and these boys used to come up and crawl on the roofs and play a lot, and my dad always sent them home. Tony DiPolito lived next door to us.
Tony DiPolito, of course he's gone now as well.
Right.
The Griners, where did they live?
They lived on Water Street, and the grandma lived on South Lyman, and that's a very interesting family. The grandpa, Sheeval, Bob's mother's father, they came here from Maryland, the Sheevals to begin
right.
with, and he was foreman at the old salt plant. But that's before my time. I
This
don't
is
remember.
Wadsworth Salt. Not
remember
the one, not
much.
not the one in Rittman, but the Wadsworth Salt.
The Wadsworth
which
Salt.
came down in 1927. Ira Griner is gone now too, is he not?
Right.
He died 4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
And your sister-in-law is also, well, no, she's still living though, isn't she?
No, she died.
Who?
Jan Spicer.
No, your sister-in-law, Bob's sister.
Oh, Bob's sister.
Yeah.
She's still living.
Yes.
She had 5 children, and she lives in Barberton. And her daughter teaches school, and she lives in Barberton. And it was her son that died on the football field about 2 years ago.
Oh my heavens. Really?
So-
what was her name? What was her married name?
I don't know what her married name was.
No, I mean your sister-in-law's married name.
Well, she was married a couple of times.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Morgan was
Morgan.
her
And
children's
she lost
name.
she actually, her daughter lost a son, or your sister?
No, her daughter's son
Her daughter, so.
was the boy that died on the Barberton
Oh my
football
heavens. Wow,
field.
wow, that's horrible. That's just a horrible thing.
And she teaches down at Wayne College,
Now, what does she teach?
cooking,
Cooking?
I think.
Okay, in the home ec department?
Yeah.
Okay. We have come to the end of the hour, unfortunately. These things go by so quickly. And I'm frustrated with this particular one because there are so many things that we want to ask you, but we have only an hour in which to ask them, so we kind of picked a little bit here and a little bit there. But Mary, we might have to do this again because we need to bring out the lineage from your grandchildren all the way down to 1852. That has to be part of our history in Wadsworth. But for the time being, we're going to have to say goodbye. But thank you very, very much
right.
for having had, for having come on the program at all. Thanks again, Mary.
You're welcome.